teaching, what's in it for me? If you read it like that, it comes across as perhaps a bit selfish, don't you think? And perhaps it is a bit selfish, but I think it is still a valid question to ask. One of the key insights of economics is that people respond to incentives. And so the question is, are we being incentivized to teach properly? And there's various answers to that. And then I think the more important question is, what's to be done about that? So having said that, I think if you're in academia, there's a certain altruistic element already involved. People do not come to academia because they want to become millionaires. And those that do are making a big mistake. Right, so I thought I'd kick off with a bit of institutional background. Just a quick question. How many of you here are required to produce research outputs, publish papers? Right, so 30% or so. So I don't need to tell you this stuff, but for the rest of you, this might be an interesting little twist on what you know. So we're in academia. Now, if you look at our contract, we have to do three things. We have to teach, we have to produce research, and that nebulous category called service, which basically translates to various kinds of admin. The thing is, though, that teaching and research, you'd think that there's some commonality there, and there is, in a sense. Both require a certain competence in the subject matter, but in many ways they are actually very different kind of disciplines, and they require very different skills. And I would argue that it requires, to do it well, both of them well, requires a kind of a mild case of schizophrenia. You really have to have two personalities. So the personality you're seeing now is teaching Paul, right? This is the guy that my students see, and happy to take questions, easygoing, not overly strung out and anything. The research Paul is an entirely different animal. Research Paul is highly focused, doesn't want to be interrupted, huge amounts of concentration, very different kind of person. So one of the challenges for me is how to manage this kind of tension between research and teaching. One of the other aspects of this role is that you're supposed to be a teacher and you're supposed to be a researcher, but you have a fixed amount of time that you can spend. And so really, these two things compete. And so the question then is, what gets rewarded? Or to put it in more econometric lingo, where's the incentives? Okay, so let's look at that. If you do your teaching really well, exceptionally well, get really good teaching evaluations, people send emails to the VC saying what a good lecturer you are. Not that that's happened to me yet, but the general response you're going to get is, that's nice. Nice for you. If on the other hand you are exceptional in your research outputs, you get a couple of papers in really top journals, the response is typically different. It's like, that's impressive. That's what gets you the bragging rights in this game. Also on a more prosaic level, to get promoted through the ranks, not that it makes a big difference in how much you get paid, but some people do care. To get promoted through the ranks requires you to produce good research, and it requires good teaching. But those things actually mean different things, at least as it's perceived by most people. Good teaching means good enough teaching, like not too much below average. Nothing that's going to be a problem. Good research, on the other hand, means exceptional. And so, given all of this, I think it's rather amazing that academics actually teach as well as they do. So that's the institutional backdrop, and I thought that might be useful to kind of motivate the question, what's in it for me? So the next slide is titled Teaching Well Regardless. So strangely enough, academics on the whole do, I think, do a fair job of teaching. And I think a big part of that is that, well, some people enjoy it. I do. I like standing in front of people and telling them how I see the world, a bit like I'm doing now. It comes naturally to me. So for the love of it. But also I think academics have fairly high standards for themselves. You don't tend to end up in academia because you're happy with average. And so, doing something in an incompetent way is just doesn't sit well with the typical academic. So I think, there's a certain amount of effort that goes into this simply because no academic likes to do anything badly. Or old habits. Perhaps teaching well is just something that's become a habit. I don't know. But the subtext to this is that there's a potential problem. Once you teach well enough, why would you want to do better? And I think that's an important question to ask. How do we get past getting good enough? How do we, if you're already above average and everyone's broadly happy with what you're doing, why would you suddenly invest a lot of additional effort in teaching better? So I don't have all the answers, but I have some ideas. And one thing that occurs to me is to look for those kind of what I would call win-win situations. So who are the people that are supposed to be winning in this? Well, there's my students and there's me. I'd like my students to be able to learn. So one of the things I've put up there is I do not teach anything. Kind of ties in a bit with what we've heard before from Tessa and from other people. End of the day, it's up to students to learn. And so I'm actually not particularly comfortable with the label of teacher either. I'm a product of what is known as the Transvaal Education Department, part of the old South Africa. And teaching back then was very different from, I guess, the way it is now. And so because of that, I don't think of myself as a teacher. But I do like to help people learn things. So, I like to help people learn. But there's a problem. I have a limited time budget, and there's the two competing imperatives, research and teaching. And so, realistically, there's only a finite amount of time I can spend helping students learn. So the question is, how can I help students learn but spend less time doing so? Right? Now that would be the silver bullet, wouldn't it? So the bottom line there, no magic bullets or silver bullets, and your mileage might vary, right? So what works for me might not work for you and vice versa. But I think it would be useful to explore the intersection of innovations that save academics time and effort and intellectual bandwidth and disruptions and help students learn better and more efficiently. So that's what I've been trying to do. So I'll present here some ideas that's worked for me. They're not all the ideas I've tried, kind of the highlights. And they might not work in your case, but it's still useful, I think, to put it out there. I've spent a fair chunk of my adult life as a student, of 14 years in total. I like studying. It certainly beats working in my experience. And so, having been a student in many different universities, many different degrees, I have a fair idea of what I like in a course. And one of the things I like in the course is not to have, to be able to find everything in one place in a structured and organized way. I don't like having to find things. I would like to just go somewhere and it's all there. And so that's what I've tried to do for my students. So on day one, it's all there. It used to be, it's now Canvas. Let's look to the future. So class notes, readings, to the extent that we can now with Tallis, workshops, workshop solutions, lecture recordings, test and exam questions, including model solutions, Excel examples of various things. So basically everything is there. That's nicely structured by topic and so forth. And the idea is that really someone could just delve into Canvas and complete the course without me. So we use Piazza for question and answer, so it's not necessarily the best tool, but it beats emails. Because once you've answered the question once, you don't have to answer it again 10 times. And there's always the risk that you answer it in 10 different ways, and that confuses everyone. And so we find that that's helpful. So essentially, I want to make life easy for my students and leave the hard bits for what matters, i.e. learning. I also, to be perfectly frank, want to make life easy for myself. And I found that as a general rule, if you make things easy for your students in terms of just how the course is set up and structured, that ends up making your life easier as well, because you get fewer of these emails. When is the test? Do we have to know this for the exam? How does this work again? Can you send me this Excel file? The answer to all of those is it's on Canvas. Okay, so the other thing that I've done is to provide online learning in a university that's not really set up to do so. Now, second to bottom note there, I think is an interesting point to make. Whether we like it or not, we are already the biggest online provider of tertiary education. And I've proven that with a simple mathematical equation. So all you have to do is take our student enrollment and multiply it by 1 minus the average attendance percentage. And you end up with a big number, several thousands, right? And those students are effectively online students. So we already are an online university, whether we like it or not. So we might as well do it well. So, like I said, I wanted to make my life easier as well as making my students' lives easier. And so I've introduced a kind of differentiated offering. So there's semester 1 teaching and semester 2 teaching. Semester 1 teaching is very much those two pictures of lecture theatres you saw earlier, right? It's the sage on the stage model. And like I said, I rather enjoy the sage on the stage bit. It's fun talking to people. But semester 2 is a little bit different. Basically, what I do is I use lecture recordings from semester 1, put it online and say, that's that, here you are. Now, unfortunately, I can't just leave it at that. I think there are regulations that require me to actually spend some contact hours and the like. So what I do is I turn up to the classroom, a bit like this one, just a bit bigger, with a coffee in my hand, which is my style. And I say, okay, what's up? Who's got any questions? And it turns out that there's always 20, 30 students, and we end up having a chat, and that goes for an hour, hour and a half or so. And I think that is also nice for students because that allows them to have that kind of one-to-one interaction with lecturers that's very hard to have when you've got 100, 150, 200 students in a class. So that's semester 2, the flipped classroom. Now, you may ask, why did I do it this way? And the answer is that I trialed this approach last year after taking a vote in the class as to whether everyone's happy for us to try the new approach. We try to be a little bit democratic. And surprisingly, about 40% of students, when I asked them, had no particular preference either way. I think that they're just happy to take things as it are, or it's not the major concern in their lives at that point. Of the people that did express an opinion, about slightly less than 2/3 liked the new approach, and slightly more than 1/3 actually didn't like it that much and said that they would have preferred the old style. So there's a lesson in that. We're not all the same. And just because I would have enjoyed a course being structured this way doesn't mean everyone likes it that way. Some people, some students do actually prefer the old school approach. And so doing it this way, having a semester 1 and a semester 2, allows them, at least in theory, to choose what suits them best. And I've always said that I'd rather be a consumer than a voter, right? You go to a shop, you pick the breakfast cereal you want to eat. You don't vote on what everyone should eat and then that's what you eat. Which, you know, so that's what I'm trying to do here. So, some things to try. I like the idea of having a teaching semester and a research semester. It certainly would make it easier to manage this kind of built-in schizophrenia. At least I wouldn't have to switch between personalities day to day. I could be teaching Paul in semester 1 and I could be research Paul in semester 2. Now I still have to get this past my head of department. But you know, this doesn't necessarily entail teaching less. You know, personally, I'd be happy to teach a higher teaching load on a per annum basis if I could have it all in one semester. And then I could say, that's done, now I can switch into research mode. Another thing that occurs to me is, once you've set everything up so that it's like, you know, works as online only, then the marginal cost of producing that is low. Right, that's one of the central insights of MOOC, or massive online education. So for instance, we could, for all the courses that we teach, do an online summer course, which is entirely online. And the marginal cost, as far as I'm concerned, is essentially setting tests and exams and marking them. And you know, that may not be that much. And what that would do is give students a huge additional level of flexibility. You know, people that might have failed the course can do it during the summer and still be on track for the next year. So these are some of the things that might be worth trying. Right, so I think there's about 12 minutes for questions and answers, and by previous showing, people do have questions to ask, so let's do that.
What were the pass rates for the semester 1, semester 2?
The same.
The same.
Well, to be honest, that's not an accident, because there's kind of a soft guidance that we can't fail half our students, and also, given what I saw in some of the exams, the actual scripts, there are some students that just cannot pass. So it went up ever so slightly, I think from about 5% to 6.5%. But the broader question, I guess, is there a difference in the overall quality? And I would say no, I didn't actually see any particular difference. Of course, it's very hard to tell because these are not random partitions, right? It's not a random allocation. People self-select to an extent. So I wouldn't draw very strong statistical conclusions.
Along the same line, I'm really curious about students' participation or how they, well, in your flipped classroom semester, how they self-pace. So when you show up in the class for a discussion, have you been noticing the students asking questions ahead of the scheduled time? Yes,
that does happen. And you know, I'm entirely happy for that to happen. Yeah, in theory, I should already know everything that's in the course, so that's okay. Generally, what I found is that out of an enrollment of about 140 or so, somewhere between 25 and 35 students might turn up on a particular day in the flipped environment. But they don't tend to be the same students. There's a couple of faces that you reliably see, but they're a minority. And so I think what happens is people kind of go through the material and then they say, hang on, no, this doesn't make sense. And it suits them at that particular day or whatever to come to university, and they turn up. And usually I say, if you understood everything, you're happy with everything, and you don't have any questions, then you don't need to come. But you can if you like. It's up to you. So many people, I think, probably from habit, try and stick to the schedule. There's also some hard requirements. So I have a midterm test, so you have to have done everything up to the midterm test if you want to have any real chance of doing well at that. I think the reality is lots of people in the third year level, which is where I teach, have other commitments outside of university at that stage. Many of them are working part-time, some are working full-time. And they appreciate the ability to be able to be flexible with time.
Just a comment question. With the MOOCs, you've got this huge upfront cost, and everyone thinks, well, that's it, we've done it. But just from seeing sort of at other levels, people get a real surprise because the students actually want like Geertsema. They won't just have it without Geertsema. So there's that, you know, it's not as simple as just doing it. And that's one of the reasons why university, Kevin might be able to say this, is when it first came out, people thought, oh, this looks good. And they realise it's actually, you know, far more cost involved. But the other thing is that, more of a question, is you said, oh, some of the students, they know all the stuff, they don't have to bother coming up. But as we all know, especially the poorer students, have a overinflated sense of their ability. So how, is there some testing that they can do to actually show they actually have understood?
Absolutely.
Not wait till this test?
Okay, so 2 points there. The first about cost effectiveness of MOOCs. You know, that's absolutely true. Just because you've got everything online doesn't mean you can go away. People do, and I think reasonably, students expect you to answer questions. Having said that, it is still less time consuming than doing it the traditional way. And so those incremental differences make a difference. Now, the second question about students, you know, perhaps being overconfident in their ability. What I do is one of the things I make available to them is a compendium of all the past test and exam questions ever asked in this course. And given that we've got this now for about 3.5 years running, that adds up to 7 semesters. You know, it's a chunky file, but it's all there. And so a lot of the questions I get are from people attempting those questions and getting stuck. And so often when I come to class, people say like, yeah, I was doing this and I got, you know, the A part, but the B part, you know, doesn't make any sense. What's going wrong? But of course, your weakest students may not even attempt that. Now, I guess this is a philosophical matter, but I believe we should give students the opportunity to fail. This may be a little bit controversial. We should give them the opportunity to succeed, but, you know, this is university. This is not school. If they you know, are not willing to work, and if they are not interested in working, and if they're not putting in the effort, that's their choice. That's fine with me. Sounds a bit harsh? Maybe. Yes.
Hi, I'm Tanya from the mathematics department. I'm so impressed with your idea of splitting flipped semester and stacked one. So I teach large sort of mathematics courses, sort of business school, and we've been puzzled for years now with the dropping attendance across the Faculty of Science down to 30%, because we provide recorded lectures for all of our courses. And we're trying to look at different educational models to deliver education. We played around with this flipping model in stage 2 mathematics course.
Right.
And I have to second the data that you're stating is consistent to the data that we've got. So people are different, yes. And about 30% prefer standard, sort of traditional, you know, stage 1 stage style lecturing. And about 25 or less percent said we don't really mind, so, and only less than 10% said that flipped classroom would be the choice of educational model. So for whatever the data you were stating, how did you collect that? Was it like a survey or?
It was a survey, yes.
It was a survey at the end of each?
Well, what we did is, like I said, when I first did this, I decided that, you know, to be fair, students should have a choice in the matter, so I put it to a vote. And that was carried by, I think, about close to 70%. And then at the end, I added questions to the survey, which you can't actually do, so I had to cut and paste in PDF. So it turned out the online questionnaire system didn't pick it up, but I was able to get back to the manual copies and collate the data from that. So that, I think is, you know, it's just, you know, one sample, but I think it gives a fair indication. I've also had, you know, people just come up to me and say, you know, I really liked it, you know, the idea that you can do things at your own pace was really convenient. But I think, you know, the reality is, people are different. People want different things, and you know, I'm happy to help people learn in the way that works for them.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
There are quite a bit to talk about flipped classroom because you have to. Sometimes it's very hard to encourage students to read before they come to the class. Have you used any kind of methodology to encourage them to read? For example, give some question to think of, or give some pre-quiz quizzes for them try to do before they come? What kind of methodology have you tried to encourage students to read before they come to the classroom?
You'll see now.
If you done any example.
Sure. The answer differs depending on whether it's semester 1 or 2. Right? So in a traditional setting, what you do is you come in there and you present the lecture, and you ask people to do the readings beforehand, and maybe 20% do. A further 10 or 15% might glance a little bit through it, and probably the rest don't, and you hope for the best. And that's kind of the reality. Again, I'm a believer in giving students the freedom. At the third year level, they should understand that if you want to do really well, you probably ought to go through the readings. And if you want to make your life easier, it helps to do the readings before you come to lecture. But, not everyone does, and that's fine with me. Now, of course, when you come to an online provision of this, it doesn't actually matter that much. If someone is behind the schedule, they can still come to the class and they can still ask me a question. And I can still help them. And they can catch up later. Or they can be in front. And so I would say of the questions that I get, maybe 60% are related to the topic of that week. And the other 40% is probably skewed more towards older topics. But occasionally you get someone that's just decided to be keen and went ahead, or they have an interest in a particular topic and they ask about that.
Do you do particular things to encourage them to read in some way?
No, not really.
Up to them.
I believe in personal responsibility and personal freedom. So, one of the things I do say is it's easy to read through material and think you understand it. But if you really want to know whether you understand it, go and try out the test and exam questions for that topic. And then you'll find out soon enough whether you really understand it. One of the other innovations, well, it's not really innovation, it's just something I do, is that my course is open book. Which means that when I do both the test and the exam, I cannot ask questions like, give me the 5 elements of responsible fund management, because they'll simply copy what's in the notes, which they'll have with them. I also can't recycle and repurpose past exam questions, because they'll have those with them, including the model solution. That forces me, and this actually is a bit of hard work, to come up with novel questions for each test and each exam. But the benefit of that is that I am actually testing their understanding. The other benefit is that I end up with this big collection of past exam and test questions, each of which is kind of novel and tests understanding. And so if you've gone through all of that and you can do it, it's highly likely that you actually understand the material.
Okay, time for me to pause.
Thank you.